Well, welcome back to another episode of Parker's Pensées. This is a podcast where we explore thoughts in philosophy, theology, nature, and life. I love thinking about cool stuff, so come think with me. Today I have another return guest, a special guest, Mike DeVito. We're going to be talking about a paper that he just published with Tyler, Tyler McNabb, another return guest. These guys are awesome. They're both the co-hosts of a podcast called Furthering Christendom, where they interview philosophers and theologians. Great podcast. I recommend you check that out on YouTube. This episode is going to be fun because we're going to be talking about some James Anderson stuff. Anyone who knows me knows I love James Anderson, but it's a little bit like watching someone kick your puppy because they're taking he's laughing. They're taking the model in a different direction than I would have. So without further ado, let's bring Mike in. Mike, thanks for coming back on the podcast, man.
Oh, Parker, it's great to be here, brother. Thank you so much for having me on. Hey, your beard looks better than it did last time, man. I don't know how you do it, but
Thanks, man.
I'm jealous. Every time I watch your show, I'm like, man, I wish I could pull off that beard. So thanks for having me back on, brother. How you doing?
Dude, doing well, man. I think since we've talked, I have joined a jiu-jitsu gym. So I've been going 3 or 4 times a week.
Oh, man. And you already know the wrestling stuff, right? So
yeah,
you're probably
man.
already like a blue belt, purple belt right in that area.
It's so much fun. I'm gonna compete soon at the end of the year. I guess that's soon. And yeah, I'd have to compete at blue belt. I bet you'd probably have to too, right?
Yeah, but not because I'm any good, just because I weigh 100 pounds more than everybody.
There's something with like if you played football or wrestled or did a different like combat sport, and they make you compete at blue belt.
So
it's like it's fair.
Yeah, and I would imagine with wrestling, the only difference is you're not trying to pin you're trying to pin somebody, but you're not trying to get somebody to tap, right? Whereas,
right, yeah,
you're taking it right to the edge and then stopping. Where this lets you, get that move in and get a hold, get a pin, get people tapping out. So.
It's crazy because like I will choke somebody out and they'll go, "Thank you."
Yeah,
I'm like, whoa, wait, hey, dude, and like, all right, cool, man. That's great.
It's really a humbling sport, and it reminds me a lot. I don't know if we talked about this last time, but it reminds me a lot of philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's like you're engaging with somebody else, and you're competing, but at the same time, you're trying to get each other better. Right? At the end of the day, you're trying to get each other better. And so, yeah, I really enjoy jiu-jitsu. I haven't been able to do it because of the COVID and the lockdowns and all the gyms closed and everything, but I'm excited to get back going. We had trained for like 5 months for a meet that was coming up, and the meet was right in the middle of March 2020.
Dang.
And it was like canceled, and it's still being pushed off. So that was frustrating. But.
Yeah. Well, if J.B. Pritzker, the governor of Illinois, is listening, we've been very safe. Don't close us down.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Well, Mike, dude, so we're gonna talk. We pulled the last minute because you and Tyler just put out this new article, which is super interesting. Like I said earlier, it's like kicking my puppy here because you and Tyler both appreciate the work of James Anderson, one of my intellectual heroes. And he was just on the podcast recently talking about simulation hypothesis and authorial analogy. But I plug his book as much as I can. It is Paradox in Christian Theology. And I'm pretty sure it's one of your favorites too, right? You use this book in yours.
I have 3 of them in the bookshelf right now because I've written so many notes that I needed to get new ones. But
I feel that.
But yeah, just James Anderson's fantastic. And I know talking to you, and I've talked to Paul Manada and a couple more of my Calvinist buddies. I know they're frustrated with this one, but I think when Tyler and I were talking through this idea, it wasn't so much. It was 2 things. It was one, the sort of lack of sufficient solutions to the foreknowledge and freedom problem. Mm-hmm. We thought, and the fact that Anderson's model seems to have gone overlooked outside of, his applying it to the Trinity and the incarnation. Obviously that's been big, but like, man, this model's too good to just let it sit on. We need to see if there's other places within Christian theology, within philosophical theology, where this could be applicable, because it's such a great, robust model that handles so many different issues and so many different topics involved. And we thought it really fit well when we were looking at the foreknowledge and freedom problem, we thought, wow, this is a really this could be an interesting place to extend Anderson's model. And so we took it there, and now we know, probably to the chagrin of Anderson and you guys, but
which is so funny because Anderson is a Calvinist of Calvinists. Like, Oliver Crisp, who's a great guy, he came on the podcast. He wrote, trying to see, can we have like a broader, more ecumenical Calvinism, libertarian Calvinism?
Yeah.
And Anderson's like, nope, and writes a blog post against that. And like, so it is funny. I'm interested to see his reaction to you guys. Which it's cool. Maybe so even it's such a powerful tool that even libertarian free will theorists can use this.
And I think, Parker, too, when you think about this, you have to look at the issue. Like, I don't know. Now you're a Calvinist, right?
Yeah.
Now, do you reason that way strictly from the theological fatalist argument? So just because God has foreknowledge of future contingents, therefore human beings can't have free will?
No, so I got there, theologically from scripture, right? Other ways, yeah.
Yeah, and I was talking to Paul too, and he was saying the same thing. Sort of, it serves as evidence for Calvin, right? It could be further evidence for Calvinism. Yeah. But I don't think there's a lot of people that just reason from the theological fatalist argument to, full-on Calvinism, determinism. Yeah. So it's been helpful for me during my studies to make that distinction too, to help me realize, okay, we're just focused on this one sort of argument, right? So God's, divine sovereignty and human freedom, that's a whole nother issue. Theologically, what the scriptures say about human free will and God's power and providence over the world, that's another issue too. And an issue that I'm excited to learn about. I mean, I have right now about a year blocked off from my dissertation just to study sort of libertarian free will, compatibilism, determinism, and all those different issues that, you could spend your whole life studying those and not get to the bottom of everything that's been written on it. So I guess I know our thesis it came off pretty strong, but I think the idea was just more, hey, in this sort of one instance where we have this paradox, this dilemma here, the Christian who wants to affirm both libertarian free will and exhaustive divine foreknowledge can appeal to paradox in this case.
Yeah.
So hopefully Anderson and everybody won't get too mad at us.
That's right. Well, let's jump in and look at the problem. So like for a theological determinist, depending on the determinism, the work is more on the free will side, moral responsibility side. And if you can settle that in your mind, the freedom foreknowledge is not really that big of a problem, which it's a little bit reverse, I feel like, for libertarians, where they want to say, well, no, we do have free will, and now it brings up this new problem of foreknowledge then.
Right.
So can you lay out like the problem as you see it?
Yeah. And you hit on it, right? The two key notions involved are omniscience and free will, and what we mean by those things. So if we look at omniscience, we take it in the paper, and I think what most Christians take it to be, there has been a movement recently, right, of this open theism,
right?
I don't know, maybe past 100 years or so. I don't know. It's relatively new on the scene.
Super new, yeah.
Yeah, where you're going to deny that God has foreknowledge of future contingents. But generally, you're going to say, yeah, God knows the future, right? God knows all true future contingents. And so that was the notion of omniscience that Tyler and I wanted to hold to. We said, okay, for the theist that wants to hold to a robust, strong sense of omniscience that includes not only infallibility, but foreknowledge, that's step one in sort of the background notions involved in the argument. And then there's free will. Now, I knew, and you can't consult enough people to write a section on free will in a paper, because you're always going to miss something. There's so many nuances. And so going back, I wish I could have changed a little bit in that free will section. But the one condition that we said causes or what people say causes the most issue in the theological fatalist argument is for the libertarian who wants to hold to the ability to do otherwise, the principle of alternate possibilities. And so we said, okay, if you want to, for the libertarian that wants to hold to PAP, right? And generally, the reasons for holding to PAP are the sort of moral responsibility, like you said. Can we make sense of heaven and hell? Can we make sense of divine punishment, divine reward, all of these things if agents don't have the ability to choose or the ability to do otherwise? And like, I'm already nervous to use those terms, right? Because everyone's say, well, you said choice and you said ability. And we have, so all of that, all the asterisks there, like, I need to whittle this down and make this more specific. But I think generally when people think of libertarian free will, the libertarian free will that causes the most problem in the fatalist argument, it's libertarian free will that says agents have the ability to do otherwise. And so we wanted to look at the fatalist argument, in light of, where is the most tension? And so we assume those two notions: foreknowledge, omniscience that includes foreknowledge, and libertarian free will that includes PAP.
Yeah. So
now you take those two notions and you run the argument. So again, my boy Paul Minato was mad at me because in the paper I had talked about deciding between drinking coffee and tea and orange juice, and one of the first thing he says was, "Hey, don't give me this coffee, tea, orange juice crap. Like, talk about deadlifting and."
That's right, dude.
I was like, "It's okay." So next, when I write the next paper, it'll have to
I caught some of it later in the paper. You talked about the Hulk.
That's right.
Analogical knowledge, God is powerful, but so is the Hulk. That was good. I like that one.
We need more of that. So you can only keep the meathead in for so many words.
Right. That's right.
So let's say tomorrow during my workout, I'm going to deadlift. I'm going to get deadlift heavy too. Get like 600-700 pounds on there. Get after it. The idea is, okay, if God has exhaustive foreknowledge of all true future contingents, then God knew, say, any time prior to tomorrow, say the beginning of the world, the beginning of creation, that tomorrow during my lift, I would deadlift heavy. And now if there's nothing we can do, oh, you know what? We probably should make it a choice. I'm sorry. Let's run it like this. Let's say tomorrow I'm getting ready to do my lift and I'm deciding whether to bench press, squat, hang clean. I mean, you got one of the core lifts. You got to decide which one to do. And I'm gonna squat. As like any good offensive lineman, defensive lineman, I'm gonna get in there and get a squat in. And so let's say I'm deliberating tomorrow during my lift, and I decide to squat. I decide to squat over bench and hang clean. Now, if God has exhaustive foreknowledge of all true future contingents, then at the creation of the world, I would choose to change the past, right? The past is fixed. So God's belief at T1 at the creation of the world that I would squat tomorrow. There's nothing I can do to change that. Then it seems like when tomorrow comes, given that God can't be wrong and that I can't change the past, it seems like I had no choice but to squat tomorrow.
Right.
And so, given the notions involved, right, it seems like, okay, either I have to deny that God knows that I'm going to squat tomorrow, or I have to deny that I have the ability to do otherwise. And so that's sort of, I don't know, did I miss anything there? I know I'm still a rookie when it comes to laying some of these issues out in real time. But so correct me if I'm wrong, but if I missed anything or if I'm wrong, but that the general sort of theological fatalist argument is what I just laid out.
Yeah, no, I think that's good. It's reminiscent of like Peter Van den Wagen's consequence argument. Like if something is determines you before you were born, before you made this choice to do it, it's just the consequence of these factors, the necessary consequence. Then like you didn't seem like you're free, because we all kind of, and I think this is a point that you kind of draw out, you and Tyler, that like intuitively people think free will is the ability to do otherwise. Like you can't really be blameworthy for killing someone if you couldn't have done otherwise. If you were predestined to do it, if you were determined biologically to do it, or some other way determined, and you weren't able to not do that. And so it's kind of an intuition, libertarian free will, and then also omniscience, the way you laid it out. It's another just intuitive thing. You ask someone off the street who knows a little bit about theology, free will and omniscience, it's going to be the intuitive claim that you guys make.
Yeah, and Parker, and see what you said too, though, I think is even is another reason why I think this was a great place to extend Anderson's model. Is on the foreknowledge and freedom problem. There is no determinism, right? It's just the fact that God knows that you're going to do something.
Yeah.
And so intuitively, you're like, well, wait, why would God's knowledge of this, have any sort of impact on what I do? Just because he knows it, right? When you think about determinism or Calvinism or God ordering everything, then there's a causal sort of relationship between what you do and what why you did it.
Right.
When it comes to the foreknowledge and freedom argument, there doesn't seem to be, at least if you're just looking at the argument itself, there doesn't seem to be anything like that in it. It's just the fact that God knows. Now you could bring up, well, what is it that God knows, right? And maybe you can work it back, and some have worked it back to, well, the best sort of explanation for what God knows is some sort of determinism, Right. But again, if you take sort of any sort of background information and just look at the fatalist argument, it seems difficult to see, well, why is it that God's knowledge would limit my ability outside of this, just this, like you said, like this consequence argument.
Yeah. And I think a important distinction too that you just brought out was like, we're looking at that he knows, not how he knows. How he knows would be the more determinism.
Yeah, right.
Just that he knows. And so, if he knows tomorrow that you're gonna hang clean instead of bench, and you bench instead of hang clean, then you've falsified his knowledge.
Yeah,
so it turns out he's not omniscient because he was wrong. His knowledge failed.
Right.
And we don't believe that's true. So
right. And that's exactly right. And this issue, the more I dig and the more I learn, I've only really been researching it since past May, June, so almost coming up on a year now. The more you dig, the more you recognize how many issues are actually intertwined in any sort of solution to this, right? So you bring up God's knowledge and him being infallible and his beliefs. And then we talk about determinism. And is there something there that God knows? What is it that grounds this knowledge that God knows? What's the causal relationship between me doing something and God knowing something? And then you pull back the layers even more, and you get into time ontologies, and you get into how each solution fits into these time ontologies and the metaphysics of time. Obviously, the free will and determinism debate comes in. Just looking at that on its own, and what we actually mean by free will, and so that was another. Again, this just highlights another reason. And I think I say it in the conclusion of the paper. It's like, look, there's so many issues intertwined here that are, when you look at them individually, are far from settled, right? Or what the correct answer is when it comes to, the metaphysics of time. It's not exactly a settled thing. And then we talked about divine providence, and some of these authors are writing about how any solution would need to fit into not only a metaphysics of time, but how divine providence and how God orders things, which makes sense. And so looking at just those two issues alone, those are hard to work out by themselves. And now you wrap up causality, dependence, all these other things, the nature of God into it, and you have so many issues meeting at a crossroads. And it was just like, this is the perfect place to appeal to analogy, because there's just so much going on here. And it's like all these nodes in this structure, and if you change one, the whole structure changes, right? And it's so like, if you change your metaphysics of time, now you have to adjust your concept of free will. And if you change your concept of free will, now you have to adjust what you mean by causality. And it's like, you change one thing and five other things adjust. And it's just like, so I hope that was another thing I really hoped, and I know Tyler and I hope to motivate, was this isn't sort of an ad hoc or a punt, even though it is sort of a punt. But it really, this is well motivated given the nature of the problem.
Yeah. Yeah. So a question that comes up for me in using, so we'll get into these terms, Anderson's MACRUE and his wrapped model, his rational affirmation of paradoxical theology. In using this, so when he applies this to the Trinity, he says, look, it makes sense that we can't understand the Trinity because the creator-creature distinction and comprehensibility, God's up there, we're down here, right? And so we may not understand the Trinity because of our place in history, and maybe our ancestors will, but probably it's because there's this ontological gap between us.
Right.
And I'm wondering, are you guys Are you guys likewise appealing to it because of incomprehensibility, or are you saying maybe we can figure this out next year? Maybe William and Craig will write some paper, and this is like a shorthand way of understanding it, or is this because there is that ontological gap? Have you guys thought through that?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'll be honest with you, I'm not quite sure right now. Yeah. I need to think about that more. I think in the paper, if I remember correctly, we laid it out as a sort of epistemic proposal where we could be rational in holding to these two propositions in spite of the apparent conflict, right? So that God has the exhaustive foreknowledge and we have libertarian free will. And say, okay, we can, as long as sort of these epistemic conditions are met, would be rational in each of these, regardless, in spite of the apparent contradiction, and so we can embrace them both still rationally. Now, so
this doesn't go against the idea that someone could figure this out tomorrow. And it's just saying you can be rational even if you don't have that answer yet. But maybe someone comes along and comes up with some brilliant solution that doesn't discredit what you guys have done in applying his model.
I think that's right. Yeah, I think that's right. I don't think you want to. At least as far as I've thought through it now, Parker, I don't think you want to say there is no solution here. We're just going to say, as of right now, we have these two commitments. And in light of this argument, they seem contradictory, but nevertheless, here's this epistemic story, and we can appeal to paradox and be rational to do it. Yeah. But ultimately, if somebody did come up with this, fantastic solution to the problem, or if through your studies you said, oh, actually this one, or the alchemist is right, or the Molinist is right,
sure.
Then you could just embrace those, right? So so I think that's right. Yeah.
That's cool. I like these. I like these kind of solutions because they give us. I always think of them to be a meathead as like a safety rack, right? Yeah. So it's like I can go with you, and you guys even address this towards an atheistic objection against theism, right? So an atheist would say, well, if God, essential attribute of God is foreknowledge, right. And so if God exists, then foreknowledge exists. But you have libertarian free will, and that goes against foreknowledge. Therefore, you either let go of libertarian free will or you let go of your belief in God. And you're saying not necessarily, even though I'm not solving the solution right now, I'm saying it's just we can justifiably believe both things because it's a safety rack. You fell on your squat, but you're not going to break your knees.
That's right. That's exactly right. And you get back up and reload the weights and give it another go. Yeah. That's exactly right. And there's a parallel, right, with the problem of evil. I hear you talking. It reminds me. Oh yeah, no. And this is sort of the same sort of response that the skeptical theist is going to make when it comes to the problem of evil. Where he said, look, we're just not in a in a place epistemically to say one way or the other. So we're open to these theodicies. We're open to these different solutions to the problem of evil. But nevertheless, given the distance epistemically between our cognitive abilities and an infinite God, we just couldn't know why he allows evil to happen. But we can still rationally believe that he is all good and all loving and all knowing and all powerful and all that. So so the solution is very similar to the skeptical theist solution to the problem of evil. It just adds that it's like all of Anderson's work. I mean, it's incredibly robust, and it adds that really robust and epistemic sort of foundation to the problem, which is just so much. I feel like so much more rich and interesting, and so. But that's Anderson's work, right?
That's right.
His stuff is great like that. So
yeah, well, and being so he follows Van Til and Plantinga. I heard actually in your podcast with him that he said he's a little bit more Van Tilian, which I was excited about. But in following Plantinga, he does make there's the de jure versus de facto objections against theism, and this is going at the de jure, like the argument that it's not that it's true or false, but that it's irrational to believe. And it's like, no, it's perfectly rational. Now let's go and solve the de facto. Let's go see. But we stop playing these games with my psychology, saying that I can't believe this stuff.
That's really good. That's exactly right. It's the de jure de facto distinction. Yeah, That's exactly right. Is it rational to hold to these? It could come up later that it de facto wrong to believe something is the case,
but it's not crazy.
Yeah, right. I love it. That's good. Yeah, I like that part.
Well, so let's really good. Let's jump in on some Anderson stuff here. So can you lay out for us like Wrapped and MACRUE's and we can talk about what work that's doing for you guys?
Yeah. So like you said, Anderson's model is he uses the rational affirmation of paradox theology, which I think is going to be my next tattoo, because I get a tattoo for every publication. So I think I'm going to get a Wrapped tattoo.
That's awesome.
But the MACRUE, that's the underlying, one of the motivating things underneath this idea. And so the idea of a MACRUE is a merely apparent contradiction resulting from an unarticulated equivocation. Mm-hmm. So the example we use in the paper say, and to draw the distinction between an actual contradiction and an apparent contradiction, right? So if I say, if some object is square, and I also say of that object it is a circle, right? That's contradictory. Something can't be both a square and a circle. It could either be one or the other, right? I mean,
or a square, not a square. Yeah,
that's right. Or a square, not a square. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And so we use a color, right? That object is monochromatically red. It is not monochromatically red, and so that's an actual contradiction, right? So far as we can tell, there's no way to reconcile that. It's a contradictory statement.
Yeah.
But now, if you had, we used two propositions. You hear someone saying, having a child is painful, and then you heard that same person say a little while later, having a child is not painful, right? And so at first appearance, that seems contradictory, right? Having a child is painful, having a child is not painful. Those seem like contradictory statements. But if you get some more information and you find out that the first statement, having a child is painful, is talking about the actual childbirth, mm-hmm. and then you hear more about the second statement and you find out that having a child is not painful means just being the parent of a child. Now that contradiction resolves, right? Because there was equivocation on the term having, right? Having in the first sense means actually having a child, birthing a child, whereas having in the second proposition meant just being the parent of a child. Yeah. And so with that, once the equivocation is articulated, the contradiction resolves.
Yeah.
And so that's what's underlying Anderson's model, is that he says all paradoxical theology should be understood as MACRUEs. And so if I have these, he talks about the Trinity, the incarnation, right? So if God is three and God is one, and these seem contradictory, but yet I have good reason to believe that God is three, good theological reason to believe that God is three, and I have good theological reason to believe God is one, whether it be, the teachings of a pastor or the sort of movement of the Holy Spirit or my reading of the Bible or whatever it may be. I come to hold these two propositions that seem to conflict with each other, but I have good evidence to think each one is true. Then okay, and this is the underlying epistemology is planning as proper functionalism, right? So I'm holding these two propositions, and if my beliefs meet planning as proper functionalist conditions, whereas I have properly functioning cognitive faculties in the environment they were designed to function, aimed at truth and producing more true beliefs than false beliefs, then I can be rational in holding to both propositions in spite of the apparent contradiction, and I can chalk it up to a MACRUE, right? So there's some equivocation going on here, and we don't know where it is, mm-hmm. but I can hold to these, and that brings us to how do we know we have an unarticulated equivocation? And you talked about before the doctrine of divine incomprehensibility, right? So it just, this is across the board. Everybody, I don't think anybody thinks we could totally and exhaustively know what we mean when we say God is this or God is that, or we have some idea, but God is incomprehensible in some sense of these terms. He's so much greater than us, right? God's ways are greater than our ways. Thoughts of our thoughts. I mean, he's an infinite mind. We're this finite mind.
Yeah.
So I use the analogy of my dog and me, right? And it's like my little 10-pound Shih Tzu Yorkie dog.
Yeah.
It always looks funny when you have some 300-pound guy walking around with a little thing. But I talk about how, okay, my dog can probably know, some things. I don't know what we mean by know there, but my dog knows the sound of my voice. He knows when I give him basic command, knows food out for him and things like that. So he has some knowledge, but my dog can't comprehend that I love my wife or that I enjoy studying philosophy or things like that. I mean, I like to think my cognitive ability is a lot greater than my dog's.
Yeah.
And so how much greater are God's abilities, right? Infinitely greater than ours. And so there's this doctrine of divine incomprehensibility. And what connects that with the MACRUEs is the doctrine of analogy, right? And so the doctrine of analogy is, okay, given this divine incomprehensibility, given that God is either so much ontologically greater than we are, or ontologically different than we are, depending on which model of God you're working with. We have to think of these terms, whatever predication we have of God, we have to think of these analogically, right? Mm-hmm. So when we say that God is loving, or God is good, or God is omniscient, omnipotent, all those things, we mean something like God is all-knowing, God is all-powerful, but not in the fullest sense of the term, right? The term is loosened a bit to allow for this idea of divine incomprehensibility. And given that the terms are loosened, right? What we're using our human language to describe God, given that we don't have a one-for-one sort of correspondence with what God is to the words that we're using and the language we use of God, and that we have to appeal to analogy, it seems natural and motivated to think at some points our theorizing about God is going to bottom out into apparent contradictions, right? And that shouldn't be surprising. There'll be times where we're reasoning about God, especially when you're getting into philosophical theology and things that are outside of the scriptures, like the what Tyler and I are doing now in this paper, the foreknowledge and free will. When you're getting into these issues that aren't explicitly stated, but even within scripture, right? I mean, Anderson does it with the Trinity and the Incarnation. Again, it's not surprising that at points we're gonna be like, well, it seems like there's a conflict here, but we have good reason to think these things are true. Yeah. And so given Anderson's model, everything that I've laid out, right, the MACRUEs and the analogy and divine comprehensibility, we are totally justified and warranted in holding to these beliefs if we meet sort of the proper functionalist conditions for warrant. And so that's the broad idea. I mean, I apologize, I'm still getting used to laying all this out. There's so many aspects of it.
You crushed it, man. That was really helpful. I
appreciate it, Parker. That's the basic idea. And so that is sort of one half of my dissertation is this, right? Is taking Anderson's model and applying it to the foreknowledge and freedom problem and really expanding on what Tyler and I did in this paper. Yeah. And so that's what a lot of what I'll be studying over the past, the next few years.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, something that I really like about Anderson and his model is that he's not cutting off his theology. He's not cutting off the corners in order to answer this problem. He's going deeper into theology and saying, no, we're going to talk creator-creature distinction, and incomprehensibility comes from that. And that's what you laid out here. Mike Ray does that in his The Hiddenness of God book. Yeah, and he does the same. Yeah, and he does the same thing to answer the hiddenness argument. And he says, hey, if we're reasoning outside of Scripture, at best, our ideas about God are analogical. Right. And in analogies, analogies break down. And he might be a little bit more pessimistic about analogies than I would like to be. But he's saying in analogies, there's ambiguity. Which part of the analogy is doing the work and which is not? And philosophers always say, well, there's got to be some kind of univocal core to it. And for the listeners, univocal just means in the same sense, univocal, with one voice, right? And so the important step in this, in a MACRUE, is they're merely apparent contradictions resulting from unarticulated equivocation.
Right.
So it's because the word is being used in two different senses. One God and three persons, the one and three are different. But when you take them to be univocal in the same sense instead of a equivocal sense, then you get this contradiction of one and three. Yeah.
Right. It seems so reasonable, right? I mean, I don't know. I'm sure I will come across it at some point, but I think you'd be hard pressed to find a theist of any flavor that says, no, we totally and exhaustively know everything we need to know about God, and we can totally exhaustively, systematically build this, all our theories about God without any equivocation, without any need to appeal to analogy, and all that. So I think it's well motivated. I think it's just intuitive. It seems right, and I think that's one of the things that makes Anderson's model so great is it's not a reach, it's not a reach at all.
Right. And so I love analogical thoughts because I am a Vantilian, and Anderson's blog, it's at prognosco.com, but it's called Analogical Thoughts because he's a Vantilian himself too. So what I love about analogy is it is that third way between equivocation. You're using one sense, univocal language, one sense, equivocal language, which is it's a informal fallacy, right? Because you're using things and you're not speaking about the same thing in the same sense. But then there's an analogy, which is like the middle way between where you can speak literally about something, you can speak truly, but it's not univocally.
Right.
And so there is this stretch there. Some philosophers talk about like a semantic stretch or you're stretching the word. So like you drop a stitch or you drop your phone, like they both drop, but it's analogical.
I think Swinburne uses the language of like loosening the terms to allow for more room, right? I don't remember where. I don't know if it's Anderson who says it or uses this analogy, but I mean, we do this all the time, right? So when I'm talking to my son and I'm trying to explain to him the workings of an atom, right? And it's like, okay, well, atoms have these particles, and you have this electron on the outside, and these protons and neutrons on the inside. The electron orbits, and so that's true in a sense, right? But then if you talk to sort of a quantum physicist, he's going to say, well, no, there's this wave function. You got all this other funky stuff going on, and so it's not really like that. So what I told my son wasn't really a lie, right? But I've loosened the ideas to convey a truth, even though the fullness of the truth of the atom isn't conveyed to him. He gets sort of the basic picture. Maybe that's a way to think about it.
Yeah. And so like a difference between analogy and like equivocation would be like I shot my gun versus like I shot hoops. And it's like that's an equivocal sense because it's not the same thing. It's the same word, just it's being used in completely different ways. And if you were to say like I shot hoops all day, therefore I shot a gun, it's like, well, no, that's informal fallacy, that's equivocation. But if you said like, yeah, I dropped a hem when I was stitching and I dropped my phone, they're both in the same sense, but it's not a univocal sense. The thing can be stretched enough without equivocating.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And what I'm interested in seeing and what I hope comes from this is I'm hoping sort of the Paul Monadas and the Parker set cases and my Calvinist friends take this and say, well, no, this is actually better applied here, right? For the determinist who wants to hold to this and can, so maybe moral responsibility and this idea of people being free and not free and still being morally responsible. And so that's the main goal. And I know that's what really Tyler and I wanted was we're libertarians, but we want this theory to get back out there because it's really not to get back out there, but I think it just needs to be utilized more. It's such a I think it's such a great tool, especially within analytic theology, that can be utilized to address so many different issues. And like you're saying, I mean, it's not unmotivated. So I'm hoping maybe you and Paul team up and write up Tyler and I.
I've been trying to entice him to come on the podcast. So we'll see. But
Yeah.
dude, I was super fired up because I was reading Oliver Crisp's book, Analyzing Doctrine, last semester, and in his chapter on the Trinity, he pulls up Anderson's work, and it's like, dude, let's go. If Oliver Crisp is using it, then it's gonna get back out there. So likewise, like I'm really excited to see what you guys are doing. But let's can we go, like, how do you guys apply the model, the RAP model and MACRUE to the problem there?
Yeah. And this is an interesting area that I think, even after writing our paper, I think needs more sort of fleshing out. Is Anderson's model builds off of, so you have planning as proper function, then you have planning as idea about the sensus divinitatis and how you can be, if God exists, we could be expected to be created with this God faculty that allows us to have these basic beliefs that God exists.
Right.
And then he extends that to Christianity. Well, if Christianity is true, then we'd be warranted in our belief in Christianity, maybe through the Holy Spirit or a pastor or something like that. And so come to believe in a basic sense that Christianity is true. And then Anderson extends it to paradoxical or seemingly contradictory doctrines like the Trinity and the Incarnation. Mm-hmm. Anderson's extension of the model only applies to theological issues, right? So maybe not directly stated, but the Trinity or the Incarnation. And so Tyler and I were limited in how we could extend the model, because we didn't want to say that libertarian free will, as PAP understood as one sort of necessary component of libertarian free will being PAP. Mm-hmm. We couldn't extend the model to that. So we had to try to motivate libertarian free will as PAP on its own, mm-hmm. and then extend the model to a theological notion, which would be omniscience, specifically foreknowledge. So we said, okay, here are these reasons that you would possibly think that libertarian free will is basic and you would want to hold to it. Mm-hmm. Moral responsibility being the thing, again, heaven and hell, all that stuff. So we quickly lay out sort of a case for why we would want to hold to libertarian free will. And then we extend the model and say, okay, you have this belief and you need this belief, or you want to hold to this belief in libertarian free will. And all the proper functional conditions are met, and so this is a warranted belief. And now we extend the model, and so what we say, okay, if we look at the fatalist argument, the theological fatalist argument, what it's saying is, if God foreknows a certain event will happen, then or a certain decision that I'll make in the future, then that decision wasn't free. And yet we want to say that decision isn't free. So if that decision is genuinely free, then given the fatalist argument, we would have to say that God didn't know that decision was going to take place. And so we say, okay, so we have this equivocation going on then with foreknowledge. So let's extend the model to foreknowledge and say, okay, we have two senses of foreknowledge 1 and foreknowledge 2. Foreknowledge 1 is God, if God foreknows all true future contingents, God foreknows all true future contingents. God has foreknowledge of all true future contingents. That's foreknowledge 1. Foreknowledge 2 is God does not have foreknowledge of all true future contingents in a way that limits libertarian free will. And so you have this equivocation going on with foreknowledge, where God has foreknowledge, but not exactly in the sense that we would think that foreknowledge can be, right? So if you had, some human notion of foreknowledge, or, if I could tell the future or something, and that's sort of what's motivating the argument. It is, God knows exactly what will happen. And we're saying, okay, God knows, but he knows in a way that doesn't conflict with PAP. And so let me get the actual, let me flip to the actual thing here, because I'm not being super specific.
So I'm looking on page, it doesn't have pages. It's like 10 of the PDF.
Yeah, so this was, we did read, I'm sorry?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Can you hear me?
Lag. Yeah. Sorry, do you hear me now?
Oh, yeah, I got
you. I'm looking on page 10 of the article, and you lay it out, and you talk about, this is where you get into the ABCD, right, argument?
Right.
And it's God possesses foreknowledge, one, of all true future contingents, and then B, if God possesses foreknowledge, and this is two, of all future contingents, human beings lack libertarian free will.
Sorry. Okay.
And I think that's really I think what you're doing, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that you guys are saying A has this foreknowledge, one, and it's not specified how God knows.
Right.
But two, or B, has foreknowledge, two, and foreknowledge, two has been specified such that it delimits or hurts libertarian free will.
Exactly.
You've picked out a certain type of foreknowledge, and you haven't specified that either. But for whatever reason, the intuition that we have, or the argument as it's laid out, picks a foreknowledge that is directly incompatible with PAP.
Right. And it makes sense, right? So if you're saying you can't bail on PAP and you can't bail on foreknowledge, then the foreknowledge that's used in the theological fatalist argument that's causing the problem, we're saying, okay, well, God doesn't have it in that sense, right? He has foreknowledge in the first sense. He has foreknowledge of all true future contingents, but not foreknowledge in such a way that it conflicts with PAP. And so, you're exactly right. I apologize. So I had those mixed up. And so we're saying, okay, there's your equivocation, right? There's something going on with the concept of foreknowledge, which would make sense. It's a divine attribute to think that we would know it exhaustively and comprehensively. On Anderson's model, it makes sense that you're not going to know that. And so that's where we located the unarticulated equivocation. Yeah. And say, okay, here's the unarticulated equivocation. Something's going on here with foreknowledge. God has it in this one sense, but not in this other sense. And we can now appeal to paradox. And so that's sort of the core idea of the argument.
Well, okay, so now I get how you guys are using the incomprehensibility. I didn't understand it before, but now I do. So you're saying, so someone is arguing with you, let's call them an atheist, and they say, freedom and foreknowledge. So God possesses foreknowledge. Go, yes. And then you go, well, if God has foreknowledge and of all true future contingents, then you don't have libertarian free will, including PAP of that variety.
Right.
And you say, well, no, that's not the foreknowledge I'm picking out. You're picking out one that's directly contradictory. And they go, well, how would it work then? What is it, like God watching a video of the Super Bowl from last year, and like they can't play the same thing? And you kind of think through, and if that's contradictory, you just go, well, no, it's not like that. It's not like that one either, and it's not like this one. You're producing all these analogies or models or metaphors. I'm saying because God is so far above us, he can have foreknowledge in a way that's not contradictory, but still appears paradoxical to me in my finite mind.
Parker, you said it better than I could have
I think I'm getting it. I think I'm getting it.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right. That's exactly the idea. And what we framed it in as a debate as a coherency issue between the atheist and the theist, but obviously it has major applicability sort of within the walls of the in-house debate over freedom and foreknowledge. But the way you lay it out is exactly right. And we didn't think it was really special pleading for the theist. Now, this won't be part of my dissertation, but this was part of the paper. Mm-hmm. And it was like, well, there are a number of naturalistic paradoxes that the naturalists will have to appeal to. We just don't know, right? You see this kind of stuff in quantum mechanics. You see kind of relativity, general relativity, special relativity, all this sort of strange and weird paradoxes that I don't understand half the time.
Right.
But the idea is, well, if we had all the information, we could figure it out, but we don't have all the information, and we might not ever be able to get all the information. But we just know an atom and an electron functions like this, and it also functions like this. And these seem to be contradictory, but if we had all the information, we'd know it wouldn't. And so we're basically pulling the same move, and it makes sense, right? I mean, we might not know on this side of eternity why these things seem to conflict.
Right.
But if we did have all the knowledge, I think it's reasonable to think that we would understand why.
Yeah. And so this has been a criticism of Plantinga's epistemology, his reformed epistemology, or proper functionalism, if you want to call it that, is that, it might leave too much room, and then the people who you don't want stand on your view. So atheists get to say, well, I'm justified in my belief in atheism because of planning as, or I'm warranted in my belief because of planning as warrant conditions. And so then Plantinga comes up with this evolutionary argument against naturalism and says, nope, you're off. I got to kick you off too. Which you've written on. Everyone check out, is it in the next Philosophia Christi?
Yeah.
Philosophia Christi?
It's in the next Philosophia Christi. Yep.
Awesome, man. Yeah. I'm looking forward to that one as well. But so with this model, something that I'm always nervous about is I don't want this game of just we're all justified. We're all just on even ground. So someone might say, well, I've heard this argument before. You start pressing them on their worldview and how it can't account for certain phenomena that we take to be basic. And they say, well, how do you expect me, a finite, evolved ape on this planet, to be able to answer all of life's questions for you? And it's the same kind of ploy, right? It's the same kind of move, saying I'm warranted, and it's kind of a skeptical anti-theism or non-theism. So I think what's interesting about you guys pulling from Anderson is that you can say my worldview makes sense of this because of the incomprehensibility of God. Now, do you have a similar doctrine in your worldview that can account for this, or are you just appealing to ignorance? Because there is a difference between just saying I don't know versus no, the rest of my theology makes sense of why I don't know.
Yeah, well, and you hit the nail on the head with the de jure de facto. I don't think we should bail on the de facto side of it, right? Like let's get the natural theologies and let's talk about sort of your presuppositional, right? So let's compare the worldviews and see whose world part is still important. You should talk. I know you said you had Tyler coming on too. You should talk to him about his project, because his whole PhD was called Closing Pandora's Box, where he lays out all these different arguments on why these different worldviews can't appeal to Plantinga's proper functional epistemology for defense of their own. So and I think that the evolutionary argument being against natural being one of the main arguments against the naturalists. So I think so he lays out reasons why even just thinking of it from a de jure perspective, there are reasons to think that these other worldviews can appeal to Plantinga's epistemology. But even more so, let's not bail on the de facto part of the debate. I think that's important. Yeah. But I do understand your concern, right? And that's something I'm trying to work out more in my head as well, right? What's too much of a punt? When are we punting on second down instead of fourth down? Do we punt too early here? Is everything basic and we can just fend off any sort of objection? Well, it's just a basic belief, or I have these proper functioning faculties, and Holy Spirit told me, and so I'm good to go. Yeah. Not that I think that that's wrong, but I feel what you're saying. There is something like, well, all right, sure, but so I guess it just all circles back to let's continue the de facto stuff as well.
No, that's right, man. So one thing that is another interesting thing is, can we make this argument in a way that an internalist would also enjoy it? So I guess most epistemologists are externalists, but most Christian philosophers are internalists. Is that right? That's what I've heard from people, and I think that it's probably has to do with our theology versus non-Christians want a naturalized epistemology, or naturalists want a naturalized epistemology. So it's externalism, and I wonder if you could get this done, just spitballing here, without appealing to Plantingian warrant for your justified beliefs. If you had a different view of warrant or justification, and you're still a Christian, I think you can still probably make that appeal to incomprehensibility and use this model.
Yeah, you could use like a phenomenal conservatism, right? Where it's saying, okay, I have this seemings that this is the strong seemings that God is three. I have the strong seeming that God is one. So in the absence of any defeaters, I am rational in holding to both of those beliefs. Yeah, so you could appeal. It seems like you could appeal to a sort of phenomenal in place of the proper function, where you could just say, okay, I have this strong seemings that God is three. I have this strong seemings that God is one. And in the absence of any defeaters, I'm rational and warranted in believing each. And they say, okay, well, the contradiction is a defeater. Well, no, we have we have this sort of divine incomprehensibility. We have this analogy. And we have this wrap model laid out by Anderson, which allows me to sort of appeal the paradox, assuming this internalist theory of warrant. Maybe something like that. I'm sure the epistemologist listening might not agree with that, but that, like you said, spitball, and that could be the case. That's genuinely how I think about it, right? That's like, I have this strong feeling that these two propositions are right. And so how do I reconcile? Do I have to bail on holding to these two beliefs? Do I have to bail on one or both, or is there a way to hold to both? So that could do, so the phenomenal conservatism, so we could do some work there. I
awesome.
think.
No, I think that's good, man, because you and Tyler wanted to extend out Anderson's reach here, and I think that's another great way to say someone else can extend this too. If you're not a Plantingian, it's okay. Yeah. You can still use this model. Maybe I haven't asked Dr. Anderson about that. I'm sure Tyler would say no, because he is taking over the world with proper functionalism, right?
Yeah. What's your theory, Parker? If you don't mind me putting you on the spot, what do you like for an epistemology?
Oh man, I'm definitely tempted more towards proper functionalism. It just makes more sense to me. I think that I think it stacks the deck for theism. I like that about it. I like being able to use evolutionary argument to kick people off. And I love Anderson, so I've learned a ton from him. Been emailing him for like 5 years now, whatever. And read all of his stuff, listened to all of his stuff, read his books. So like, yeah, I do like it. But then a lot of my friends who are Christians are like, externalism's dumb. And I'm like, dang it. What about Plantinga? And they're like, he was really smart, but internalism's where is that? So yeah, still wrestling. Well, dude, so what I want to close on, what I think is interesting is some people who saw your paper online or who are listening, and I don't know, I'll probably title this something with paradox in it. They go, well, this isn't a paradox at all. We have a solution for it. It's B theory of time, right? And so I think what's cool with you guys, or whatever, yeah, they'll use an analogy like someone watching a taped NFL game and saying, yeah, you can have foreknowledge and blah, blah, blah. I think what's interesting there with you guys is you're saying we're limiting it to the paradox form from this argument, and just saying we're not going to commit ourselves to B theory or to this theory. We're not going to do the extra steps of committing. We're saying just at this level, it can be justified, it can be warranted. And so then you can go and do your work and solve the de facto objection in whatever way you want, but we want to do it in such a way that everyone who holds to libertarian free will and foreknowledge can be rational in affirming it.
Exactly. Yeah. And that kind of goes back to what I said at the beginning. And it's really, if you read the conclusion of the paper, that's really sort of where my head is at, thinking through these issues. But these issues are so intertwined, and there's so many different sort of philosophical sub-discipline implicated in this problem that and I wonder, it seems relatively unique within the walls of philosophy, given how many things need to be settled in order to come up with a sort of comprehensive solution. And how if you change one, like I said before, if you change one, 3 others, you need to adjust 3 others. Right. And so that's really sort of, you're talking about the upshot, the beauty, I think, of this proposal is you can totally be neutral on all those other things as far as, the holding to these two, holding to free will and foreknowledge. You can be neutral to the metaphysics of time. You can choose your metaphysics of time. You can choose whatever sort of free will, you're going to choose free will, causality maybe, or the nature of God, things like that. So that's the beauty of it, is you don't have to play this game where it's like, okay, this is I need this on time ontology, right? I need this B theory of time. And so well, does that mean I can't hold to, what is God like then if I have to hold it? Well, maybe I got to change the nature of God. Yeah. And so you're doing all these things that change all this other stuff. And so it's like, well, now put all that to the side. And I don't think, and this is why I asked you at the beginning, I don't think this problem warrants such moves, right? It seems when you initially hear the argument, right, because God knows the future, I don't have free will, that just seems wrong to think, at least initially. You're like, well, that's why. There's no, what could possibly be the connection? And then you get into it and you see, wow, there really is a problem here.
Yeah.
But I think the problem is just more of how we could ever understand these terms all together, right? And how we could ever build a coherent picture with all these different unsettled philosophical subdisciplines. And so I think, again, I think this is a perfect place to appeal to analogy. What I said to you before, what I'm excited to think about is, and to see what comes of this, is what the other side of the debate has to say, right? Can the Calvinists utilize this to motivate, to better motivate sort of Anderson's model on a theological determinist or a Calvinist? And I know that those words are loaded too, but you know what I'm saying, right? I mean, on a more, is there a different way to apply this that's better, that's more motivated, that doesn't need to, that we maybe could extend just to theology instead of having to hold to this non-theological, arguably non-theological notion of libertarian free will as pap. And so, so yeah, a lot going on here. And then to give you a little sort of hint on where I'm going, I'm in my dissertation, and I've been working closely with J.C. Beale, and we're writing a paper together, sort of exploring a non-classical approach, non-classical logical approach to the issue, where we say, okay, no, it is a genuine contradiction, right? There is a real contradiction, but you can have real contradictions, right? So we give this glut theoretic account and sort of put that out on the table as a possible solution.
That one blows my mind, dude. That one is nuts. I got to read his book, but I'm like,
Parker, it's so good.
The Dialethian answer like makes me break out in hives.
Yeah.
It's so tough.
It is. It's made having my dissertation, the sort of the cornerstones of my dissertation being James Anderson and J.C. Beale,
right?
It's just like every day I wake up and like, I'm so happy because I get to read the works of these two titans.
Oh, that's funny, man. I thought I wouldn't get any sleep. I feel like I would just have them wrestling in my head.
I don't get any sleep. I'm up at 3 a.m. thinking, well, wait, is this a paradox?
Yeah.
Is this a contradiction?
Yeah.
Am I alive? Do I exist?
Yeah.
Man,
that's awesome.
The work of these two theologians, philosophers, is just, it's really a privilege to get to read this stuff every day.
Yeah.
And two awesome people. Like you said, you've had James Anderson on. We've had him on our podcast. I mean, he's unbelievable.
Yeah.
And then I've gotten to work closely with J.C. Beale, and JC's scary smart, right? I mean, just scary, brilliant.
Logician, right?
Logician. And just like you think Einstein genius, like the top philosophical journals come to JC to publish work. You know what I mean? He's good. And like Anderson, just incredible people. I mean, they're just awesome people.
Yeah.
And so, I'm really grateful that my dissertation is based around their work. It's an honor and a privilege to try to expand the work of two just titans, theological and philosophical titans. So it's a joy,
Yeah, dude, that's awesome. I'm really excited to see what you do, especially with Beale stuff. We got to keep talking about that because I'm interested. I'm terrified, and I really like I like classical logic. So I'm terrified, but it might sway me. We'll see.
Parker, it was like 5 minutes of talking to JC, and I was like, oh my goodness. I don't know the law of contradiction. I don't know if that holds all the time, man. So
I flirted with letting go of bivalence before because certain models of presuppositions, Straussonian presuppositions might mess with that, but I'm scared, man. I'm scared. So we'll have to see. I am intrigued by your challenge or your invitation for the Calvinists to grab and go with I guess, freedom and determinism. I wonder if Anderson, I think he did bring it up in the book, but he didn't use it the way he did with like the Trinity and incarnation.
I think he gestures at it as like you this could be extended to this problem, but I don't think he takes it further than that.
Yeah,
I'm excited to see the work that's going to come of this. And again, the goal, I think, if you speak to Tyler, he'll say the same thing: is we need to utilize Anderson's model more often because it's such a great model, such a great tool.
Yeah. So I've taken his work on the authorial analogy in Calvinism, Problem of Evil, and I wed that with Dr. Van Hooser's for my master's thesis. And so that's the way I go with freedom and determinism. But it would be because I try to give like a de facto answer, right? And it's that we're living in a novel, and it's God is an author in an analogical way. Yeah.
Have you put that? Have you submitted that for publication?
I have with one dude. Just like it's a master's thesis, so I don't want to get too out over my skis. Like Van Hoos said, it was really good, so I'm encouraged by that. If I could get him to write something for it, then I could get it anywhere. It's Van Hooser. Let's go.
That's right. You're a beast, brother. I mean, you gotta get that out there so we can read it, man.
That'd be sweet. Yeah. Well, dude, this has been awesome. I thanks for sending me the paper. Thanks for talking to me about it. This is really fun. I'm sure people right now listening are loving it. This is really fun.
Awesome. Parker, thank you for having me on, man. Sorry it got dark in the room. I forgot to turn the lights on, but sorry for the internet stuff. And I'm excited to come back on. I'll get that once I get further down the line with JC Beal stuff. We'll hop back on and discuss that as well.
Got to, man. I love it. Awesome. Well, we could talk about this more, but it's going to have to do it for now. This has been Parker's Pensées, and as always, all glory to God.